Okay, Chris Peaks back here today with Congressman Mo Brooks. I've had the pleasure of talking to him several times and going to get his take on what the race is looking like now for the presidency. Congressman, how are you, sir?
Doing great.
Thanks for talking to me again. So, I guess we'll go back. Um, I guess we'll start back from the day of the attempted assassination on the president. I mean, at that point, I thought Donald Trump was a lock-in. What's your thoughts on it?
Donald Trump and his team probably made the biggest strategic error of any presidential campaign in history when they agreed to debate Joe Biden so early, thereby giving the Democrats the opportunity to replace Joe Biden as their nominee. If he had held off debating him until after the Democratic National Convention, after the ballots were getting printed, even though Joe Biden's lack of mental capacity would have been in full display, it would have been too late for the Democrats to effectively replace him with another candidate that did not carry the Joe Biden baggage. So that was a horrible, horrible timing and tactical error, unforced error by Donald Trump and his campaign. Um, and the Democrats, they want to win. So they were not at all hesitant once they saw the polling, once they saw how weak Joe Biden was. Uh, they played hardball and they forced him out. And now they've got a credible candidate. The news media and the Democrats have rallied behind Kamala Harris in a major way. Her polling numbers have improved. And right now, what would have been a landslide victory for Donald Trump over Joe Biden is a toss up with the trend lines favorable to the Democrats.
Um, Speaking of that, that debate. I mean, once that America watched that debate, there was no coming back. There was no speech. There was nothing Joe Biden could do at that point. I mean, it was over. Um, do you think that they threatened to invoke the 25th to force him out?
I'm sorry, repeat that. Do I think what?
Because what I've heard that Obama made a call to him. Do you think that Obama threatened to invoke the 25th and have him removed?
No, I don't think anybody used that kind of hardball tactic. What they did was use every persuasive tool at their disposal to persuade Joe Biden that he was no longer electable.
I mean, yeah, because what the people were telling me, they said that Biden's internal poll number had him down as many as 5 or 6 points. I mean, that would have been like a Reagan Mondale landslide almost if Trump won the popular vote by that much.
Well,
I
it would
mean,
have been bad for Biden because the bad debate performance that Joe Biden had in June, when you're suffering from mental capacity deficiency and decline, that was the best debate he was going to have for the rest of his lifetime. He was only going to get worse. Unfortunately, that's the effect of aging as fast as Joe Biden has aged.
do you think that, I mean, as bad as he was doing in the number, that it would have been a situation where not only he went, but he would have taken 50 House members and 8 senators with him?
Historically, when the ticket leader for a political party does well, that bolsters across the board the numbers for that presidential candidate's political party. Now, that doesn't mean that, say, if it had been Donald Trump versus Joe Biden in a landslide, every Republican would have won. No. But it does mean that you could have expected 1, 2, 3 percentage points moving in favor of our Republican candidates all throughout America. And if you look back at history at how many close races there are every single election cycle, that probably was worth, if it had progressed to Biden versus Trump, that's probably worth 1, 2, 3 Senate seats and 10 or 20 House seats. So in the House, you would have seen the Republican majority strengthen. And in the Senate, you'd have seen the Republicans having a majority. That's what that tactical error by having such an early debate has cost the Republican Party. Now, the election's still a little over 2 months away, so we might can rebound. And I think to a certain degree, an argument can be advanced that Kamala Harris is enjoying a honeymoon period with the voters. But nonetheless, Joe Biden was not going to get a honeymoon period from the voters, particularly after that debate. So it was a major loss for the Republicans when Joe Biden decided to drop out. Kamala Harris became the Democrat nominee, and everything has shifted in Kamala Harris's favor. Now, don't get me wrong, Donald Trump can still win. It's just a lot more difficult. As of this moment, it's a toss-up race with the trend lines in favor of Kamala Harris, but it's a toss-up race because in the key battleground states, Donald Trump is still competitive, even though he's lost 4 or 5 points to Kamala Harris versus where he was with Joe Biden.
Well, it's just not from it, and I'm not spiritual, but do you think that some of the Democrats might have been behind wanting Biden to go on that debate?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
The Democrats. There were people in the Democratic Party and the establishment of the Democratic Party who had personal knowledge of the decline of Joe Biden's mental capacity. They weren't willing to say that publicly, but they knew about it and they were concerned. And I personally believe, without any supporting evidence, but just my knowledge of politics and the way things work, I personally believe that those Democrats who were fearful of Joe Biden's mental decline are the ones who helped persuade Joe Biden to have a debate in June, which is far earlier than any televised debate there's ever been in a presidential race. So it was a smart move on the part of those Democrats who helped persuade Joe Biden to have that debate in June rather than after the Democrat and Republican conventions were both over with.
I mean, because when I watched that night, I mean, and it's not about age, because I'm been friends with I'm still a little kid. I'm good friends with Bill Baxley. We talk once a week, and Bill's like 80 or 84, and I mean, he is as sharp as somebody 20 years old. But when I seen Joe Biden walk out there on that stage that night, I mean, I looked like a man that I wouldn't be surprised if he passed before January. And when I was listening to him, I mean, like, you remember one statement he's talking about Medicare, and he said, "We're killing Medicare," and just lost what he was talking. And I was like, and I felt bad for the man because you could tell that this is almost a nursing home patient. And then it's at the same time, I felt scared because I was like, who's in charge of our country?
Unelected staffers.
I mean, and that's just a scary thought to me. So now let's get into here so Kamala gets the when you're going to be nominated. What are the Republicans thinking? Because they start with this DEI, and of course she has a DEI candidate, but they're playing, to me, right in the Democrats' hands because now they're crying racism, sexism, and what is that a dumb move to do that?
It is a horrible move on the part of those Republicans who are focusing on race or sex, because neither of those things amount to a hill of beans. Both are totally irrelevant to whether a person has the ability to be an effective president for the values that that person holds dear. What the Republicans should be doing, instead of attacking Tim Walz or Kamala Harris personally, the Republicans should be, in my judgment, focusing on the public policy issues that the public wholeheartedly agrees with us on, most importantly, border security, but also whether we're going to have a free enterprise economist or we're going to be Marxist, also whether we're going to have moral values or we're going to discard them in favor of immorality. Also, law and order ought to be a big. See, we've got we've got a dozen or 2 dozen major public policy issues that help motivate voters to vote for our nominee. But quite frankly, the voters are getting tired of just hearing Donald Trump acting like an elementary school kid, hurling derogatory names at another kid on the playground. That's not constructive.
I mean, I saw somebody the other day, Congressman. It was like, I'm in New Jersey in 1937, and I'm watching the Hindenburg go down. There's nothing I can do but just sit there and watch it, because I'm thinking, Kamala Harris is liberal as Bernie Sanders, and Donald Trump is sitting up there, like I said, and just hurling his attacks instead of pointing out what she wants to do. I mean, you talked about issues a while ago. I was looking at it the other day, and the top was like inflation, economy, border security, law, everything that he should be running away with. And I don't know who's running his campaign, or if he just can't be controlled. What do you think the situation needs to do?
Well, one thing I've noticed about Donald Trump is akin to what I noticed about Joe Biden, except with Joe Biden, the decline was much more significant than what I have noticed with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not as emotionally or mentally sharp as he was 8 years ago. And it was always difficult for campaign and political gurus to try to persuade Donald Trump to do things that would enhance his prospects of winning an election. Gosh, I don't know how many times political gurus have advised Donald Trump to do one thing. They're right to have done it. And Donald Trump, in a fit of pique or an impetuous nature, just disregards that advice. He might have agreed with it at the time that he was getting it, and told him that he was going to adhere to that advice, that it was good advice. And then he just tends to lose it when he gets in these rambling speeches that are just all over the map. He's always trying to have some kind of witty or cutting remark that makes the headlines. Unfortunately, those witty or cutting remarks that were so effective against Hillary Clinton, they kind of lost their edge with Joe Biden in 2020, and they're having a negative effect on Donald Trump in 2024 because the voters are just tired of it and they're seeing through it.
I mean, and I noticed what you said too, because when I watched him in the debate with Biden, yeah, he was in command, but he was not the Donald Trump of 8 years ago. And then I'm watching him out there on the stump and talk about that. He's talking about Hannibal Lecter, and I'm like, why are they not putting him on a teleprompter like Kellyanne Conway did and make him stay on message? I mean, is he just not somebody that you can make do that?
Donald Trump has a short attention span. And as a consequence of that short attention span, he often forgets the long-term strategy of his campaign and just goes off the rails. I wish it wasn't that way, but if you've watched various campaigns over the years and you have a pretty good idea as to how best to run them, you don't run them just by name calling.
Right.
Now, that happened to work some with Hillary Clinton, but people, I think, recognize that folks also knew enough about Hillary Clinton to where some of those labels that Donald Trump threw out there stuck.
Yeah, Hillary Clinton was somebody that you could go after. I mean, it wasn't going to hurt you like he's going after Kamala.
Well, it doesn't stick anymore,
mm-hmm.
and people see it now as Donald Trump just being Donald Trump, and it's hurting Donald Trump because voters are tired of it. So voters want someone who's going to be a leader. Best example I can give is, say, Ronald Reagan,
right?
Who represents his views well and does so in a diplomatic and professional way. You never saw Ronald Reagan getting in the gutter and just hurling expletives or engaging in name calling about his opponent. he persuaded people that his vision for America was the best vision for America. And that's why he beat an incumbent president, Jimmy Carter, in 1980, and then in a landslide wiped out Walter Mondale in 1984.
I mean, Congressman, you said that I was talking to somebody the other day, a prominent Republican here in Alabama, and it was like, could you have met Donald Reagan? Could you imagine Bob Dole, George H.W. Bush, Lamar Alexander? Could you imagine those guys standing up there and saying the things that Donald Trump is doing? I mean, it's just, I mean, you have to have some kind of decorum. I mean, in this, I mean, it's like you said, it just looks bad.
Well, you don't have to be saintly and an angel 100% of the time,
Right?
but it's important for you to leave voters with an "I like you" impression.
If you was running this campaign, would you not be trying to tie Kamala and say this is Biden's second term, this is her economy, her failed foreign policy, it make this a referendum?
I would as much as I could. It would be somewhat difficult because the news media is overwhelmingly in favor of Kamala Harris and against Donald Trump. So it's hard getting that message out, particularly if it is a little bit harder to get the voters to understand the linkage. What I would do is, again, focus on the public policy issues that voters care about, that they are most dissatisfied with Kamala Harris about, and most agreeable with Donald Trump on. That's the way I always approach campaigns. However, keep in mind, I just lost a Senate race where Katie Britt was extraordinarily dishonest in attacking me falsely about a lot of things that she claimed I did that I didn't do. And I lost, Katie Britt won. So sometimes that approach works.
So we were talking about a while ago, talking about the numbers, and I follow them every day, trying to look at them, and these polls are so weird. Like you'll have 5 polls up there, Trump up by 1, Harris up by 5, and tied in others. But so I'm looking at the trends, and it seems like as of now, and it could change next week, but it seems like they've at least leveled off where they stopped the hemorrhaging, so to speak. If you notice that,
I wouldn't say that it has stopped. I would say that the gain that Kamala Harris is making is not as much as it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, but she is still extending her lead over Donald Trump with voters across America. But again, we don't have a national election.
right?
What we have is an electoral college system where each state is entitled to a certain number of votes. So if you win 272 electoral college votes with 51% in every state that you won, you can lose the others by 100% and lose the national election with only 40% and still be elected president. So Donald Trump, he's still in pretty good shape. It's still competitive. But if these trends continue, then the Republicans are going to be in a most difficult position.
Because the media, ever since it's been almost a month now, every article they have come out, Harris gaining on Trump, Harris. I mean, according to that, she's having a 20-point lead right now. But like I said, it's still a competitive race. And I'm looking back at the numbers in 2016 and 2020. Donald Trump is still right now polling better than what he did in those 2 races at that time. I mean, if they could get a message, I still think this is an easily winnable race. I mean, because like you missed,
it is a winnable race if Donald Trump can get people to vote based on public policy issues. It is not a winnable race if people are thinking about Donald Trump's character when they pull the lever.
That's if you were right, I mean, how do you attack everything that's came out, Donald Trump over the years, you know, how would you, if you was on the Harris side, would you continue to attack him, or would you try to build yourself up as the new uh the new candidate, the new the new generation? I guess that's what I'm looking for.
I would not make it an or, I would make it an and. You have to bolster your own reputation because you're under attack. And you have to also point out the weaknesses in the opposition. Now, I prefer that you point out weaknesses relating to public policy issues unless your opponent has done something that is so damning the public needs to know about it. Most candidates don't have, I was going to say, that kind of felony conviction, but in this race, we've got a candidate who's got a felony conviction. So, again, you don't, if you're Kamala Harris, you want to duplicate to some degree the Democrat strategy in 2020 when they had Joe Biden campaign from his basement.
Right.
Didn't really say much, didn't really do much. So the issue was about whether you liked or disliked Donald Trump. And enough voters disliked Donald Trump and voted for Joe Biden that Joe Biden won. That's the Democrat strategy and game plan or playbook in 2020. And I'll be really surprised if they don't try to duplicate that in 2024. Make it about Trump, because Donald Trump has far more people who have an unfavorable opinion of him than he has people who have a favorable opinion of him. Now, on the flip side of that coin, Kamala Harris's favorable unfavorable ratio is also pretty bad.
Right.
So if I'm Kamala Harris, I don't want people going to the polls thinking about me. Okay. If I'm Kamala Harris, I want them thinking about Donald Trump's negatives, not Kamala Harris's negatives.
So how do you see these debates playing out between them two?
Well, if I were Kamala Harris, I'd find a reason not to have the debate.
That's what I was saying. She's not, to my knowledge, she's not giving a press conference or an interview since she's become a presumptive nominee, has she?
No, and that gets the news media frustrated, but the general public doesn't care about that.
And speaking of that, why did Donald Trump go to that black journalist meeting? I mean, I don't see how he get anything to gain out of it.
Well, he's trying to get votes wherever he can get votes. Unfortunately, for Donald Trump, the organization that he appeared before did not take kindly to Donald Trump or his remarks. Donald Trump did not help himself by the way he reacted to their criticisms. And so that hurt him with that group of voters.
Okay, so let's talk about some more numbers here. So there's some the other day that I seen that caught my eye. They had the vice president capturing right now 73% of the black vote, and Donald Trump was polling at 18%. Do you believe those numbers are accurate?
No way to know.
Okay. Now, I was looking at 2016 and 2020 and where the final polls were going into election day. Donald Trump, of course, his numbers at right now are essentially the same thing they were in the final polls in both races. And in 2016, he overperformed by around 3%. And he did the same thing in 2020. Do you think there's still a hidden Trump voter out there that's not?
No, I don't think there's a hidden Trump voter out there. I think that in the waning days of the campaign, both in 2016 and in 2020, Donald Trump did a better job of being on message and focusing on what he needed to focus on to maximize his voter turnout.
Okay.
So he was able to some degree change the minds of some of the voters who are on the fence, and there aren't very many of those. But to another degree, he was able to inspire his voters to turn out in numbers that were higher than what the polling suggested. See, I can guarantee you right now, if Kamala Harris turns out 100% of her voters, I mean, the people are for Kamala Harris if they get to the polls. If she turns out 100% of those people, she'll win in a landslide. Similarly, if Donald Trump turns out 100% of his voters, he's going to win in a landslide. So a lot depends on your ability to inspire your people to go vote. You can't have an election where 40% of your opponent's voters show up to vote and only 30% of your voters show up to vote. So the key is to inspire your voters to turn out in higher percentages than your opponent's voters.
I've told to several people, I said, I think this race is going to come down to whoever can mobilize their voters to turn out in the most numbers.
No question that, and how many votes the Democrats can steal because they've been unlawfully cast.
Yeah, I mean, I know you probably seen the other day here in Alabama that we had several thousand illegals that were that got on the voter rolls, and that just
over 3,000 names have been reported by our Alabama Secretary of State to the Alabama Attorney General for legal resolution. We'll see how it plays out. That's 3,000 people who are non-American citizens, yet were registered to vote in Alabama.
And that's just what we know about. I mean, how many more could there possibly be? I mean, not only here, but I mean, we discussed that. I think you said you thought there could be as many as 3% on the list.
Federal government's General Accountability Office conducted a study. Okay, that's an independent organization. It was about 2 decades ago that found that in parts of the United States, as much as 3% of the entire registered voters list consisted of people who are not American citizens. And it's probably worse now because of our open border situation. But 3% would have determined who won the election in 2020. 3% determined who won the election in 2016. 3% in a populace that is fairly evenly divided is a huge number.
So that was kind of the next question I was going to ask you. So I think that Joe Biden won the popular vote by like 5.5% or something like that in 2020. So, and when you look at the states, you're talking about what, 150, 200,000 people that decided that, roughly, in the states like Arizona, Georgia, and the Rust Belt. So
it was less than 30 or 40,000 people who decided the election in 2020. I don't remember the exact number, but it wouldn't have taken much to have flipped Georgia to Republican, Arizona to Republican, maybe Wisconsin to Republican, Pennsylvania to Republican. And if you do say just those 4 states, all of a sudden Donald Trump is winning easily.
So that was going to be my next question. So if it was 5%, and if it just stays like this at 3%, and meaning he would move 2% back to the right. It's kind of a tough question, but mathematically, that looks like he could still win if he lost the popular vote by 3 points.
Oh, yeah. It is not at all impossible or even improbable that Donald Trump will lose this election. He can win, okay? But he's got to be on message. He's got to minimize his mistakes. He's got to show that he's got the mental and emotional stability to be president for 4 years at his advancing age. And he's got to become more likable with more voters. A lot of voters are just turned off by him and his personality. It's about like Ann Coulter, who leads the national effort for border security. Mm-hmm. calling Donald Trump an awful, awful man, but she's going to vote for him.
Wow.
Well, I mean, she's about as conservative as we could hope to have on border security. And for her to have those kind of reservations about the Republican nominee for president, gosh, how much does that affect Joe and Jane Citizen, who also are tired of the shenanigans of Donald Trump, like his policies, but very much dislike his persona. So it would be much, much better if Donald Trump were to improve his persona, his public image, so that he becomes likable to more voters. Now, don't get me wrong, there are tens of millions of voters who like Donald Trump as he is, but in a national election, you want to maximize that number, not decrease that number.
So, well, let me ask you something, Oxford. Talking about these voters out there. When we're looking at Pennsylvania right now, I know these guys, these campaigns, they're getting numbers that I'm not seeing with 538 and stuff. It seems like that there is a huge emphasis between Harris and Trump on Pennsylvania. Do you think that they are viewing this as a must-win state in this race? I mean, it seems like they're putting a lot more resources and time in Pennsylvania than anywhere else.
It's not 100% sure that it's must win. But right now, if you look at the polling on a state by state basis, Donald Trump is ahead unless he loses Pennsylvania.
Okay. I mean, because I'm looking at, I see something just interesting today, which this is what they call polling. Do you think in this day and time we're getting like correct or numbers close? Because I'm looking at sorry, I have a problem. Stuff like I said, 4-point lead here, 2 lead here, and then I'm looking at demographics, and it's like Trump's supposedly polling better with women, and white voters, and he's like was even doing better with young voters. I'm like, how can he be doing better and then losing in national wise? I'm just I don't know if we can actually trust these polls like we once did. I mean, what are your thoughts on that today?
Well, you should take every poll that comes out with a large grain of salt. They can give you an indication, not a certainty. These polls can give you an indication of where things stand on a particular day. But keep in mind that these polls historically are more entertainment than they are something you want to bet on. Even they admit that they've got 3 or 4% margins of error. I personally think it's significantly higher than that. I personally think that the pollsters don't know nearly as much about how voters are going to vote than the pollsters want people who they want to get money from to believe. But if the polls are accurate and they're only 3 or 4% margin of error, well, gosh, that 3 to 4% right now, depending on which way it goes, who does that margin of error hurt or help? That's the outcome of the presidential race. That's how close this thing is right now nationally.
So, all right, so let me ask you this. Sometimes, silence speaks volumes. And there's one man who, very good look at his numbers. And I'm going by not what he's not so much said, but David Axelrod has been very silent. Do you read into that anything? Or, I mean, because to me, Axelrod gave the impression that he thinks they're going to lose.
I am skeptical that David Axelrod would say that the Democrats are going to lose.
Well, he's made the statement twice.
It is a at this point in time to run scared in order to motivate people to contribute money, to volunteer time, and to vote on election day. So you're going to see both political parties and both presidential campaigns being somewhat optimistic about their chances. You have to be optimistic, otherwise people aren't going to bother to go to the polls if they think you're going to lose. So
Right.
they're going to be somewhat optimistic about their chances, but they're also going to try to scare people into turning out to vote by focusing on all the bad things of their opponent. So that might be a tactic on the part of Axelrod to try to ensure that his political party wins this election. But in his heart, I think that he believes that this is a toss-up race based on how close things appear to be.
So, what about the issues we was talking about? I mean, all of them should be republicanism. I mean, if she gets in, I guess I'm going to ask you, would you be pointing out, hey, we're better on the economy, we're better on inflation, we're better on law and order, we're better on the border? Because I'm looking at this, if she gets in and we've got a Democratic House and Congress, I'm scared of what they're going to pass. I mean,
well, you are, but the problem is, to a very large degree, the American people have already lost. America is headed towards a decline, a cliff, and an abyss, if for no other reason than because of our $35 trillion debt load. That is now close to, if not exceeding, $1 trillion a year in interest payments. And that's a big chunk of change.
Just $1 trillion in interest.
I mean, we're headed to a national insolvency and bankruptcy. So my advice to people when they ask me about politics is to be prepared for varying degrees of anarchy around the United States and to be in a position to grow your own food and protect your family if a worst case scenario hits.
So, yeah, and I was talking about along the lines of that the other day. So you agree that's possible, something like that could happen? I mean, that we lost all law and order and we had no government.
Well, it won't be the first time that's happened with a nation. In fact, it has happened with every major empire or kingdom throughout the history of humanity.
Especially, I remember
you look at the Romans,
yeah,
they fell apart. You look at the Mongols, they fell apart. You look at the British Empire, it fell apart. Go down your list of major empires that have existed throughout history. You know what? Every one of them has collapsed. It's really the remarkable nation that is able to become number one and stay number one.
I was a big supporter of both races of Dr. Paul, and I remember his commercials, and he said that basically what you said, we're going down the route of the Roman Empire. We're overseeing ourselves financially and militarily, and we're going to end up falling. On that. And
well, let me make it real simple for all your listeners. $35 trillion translates into a debt burden of over $100,000 for each and every man, woman, and child in America.
So $100,000 for every person in America is there.
Every person, even the baby, has to write a check for $100,000 if the federal government goes insolvent because our creditors simply say, we're not going to loan you any more money. And per taxpayer, it's in the neighborhood of $275,000 for every taxpayer that has to be coughed up if our creditors simply say, we're not going to loan you any more money. Well, you're talking about an economic collapse worse than the Great Depression, probably rivaling the southern states in the 1860s and 1870s, because of the destruction of the Civil War followed by Reconstruction. And if you couldn't grow your own food back then, if you weren't able to produce something that other people who were poor had to have, then you starved.
So how did we get in this shape? I mean, I remember it was like the 70s was, I think, was like $600 billion, $500 billion, something like that. How did we get to where, a couple $100 billion to 35 trillion?
Dumb and greedy voters. They think that there really is a free lunch. They want politicians who will give them free stuff. And it never occurs to them that they, as American citizens, owe the payments on the debt service and the payback of all that money that's been given away. There's this huge brain synapse gap with the average voter between the $35 trillion owed to the United States of America and the realization that every single American has to pay their share of that debt the moment our creditors say so.
I this discussion the other day, arguing, it's talking about the student loans. I said, look, nobody told you to do this. I said, what you don't understand is they don't make free money. Okay, somebody's going to be paying for this. There's no such thing as free college now. That's passed on to somebody else.
That's right.
And and tell me if I'm wrong on this, because I hear the Democrats use these scare tactics like, oh, those Republicans, they're going to do away with Social Security, they're going to do the Medicare. I've never heard Republicans say that. I've never heard them say that they're wanting to do away with this. And it's like, look, the Democrats are using this just to give away more stuff.
Well, scare tactics are the bread and butter of many a Democrats' winning campaigns. And so they continue with that theme because a lot of voters are motivated to vote Democrat based on the fear that the Democrats are able to instill. But let me get back to our financial circumstances. Over $1 trillion a year is paid in interest on the debt, although that varies a little bit depending on interest rates, okay? That's a very, very large number. What's going to happen if our creditors not only demand the $1 trillion+ a year to pay back prior debt, but our creditors also refuse to loan even more money? What's going to happen when the federal government can't borrow money to pay the interest on the debt, which is what we're doing now, so that there's no real pain?
So we're just paying the interest on the debt, is what you're saying. That's all we're paying on it, is just the interest.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So nothing's
we're borrowing money to come up with the money to pay the debt service costs. And I need to be clear in the way I say this. There is principal that becomes due that must be paid to our creditors, but the way America pays it is they immediately issue more treasuries and bonds. So we're not paying this debt service cost or principal on the debt with existing revenues. Rather, we are borrowing even more money to pay it off. It's about like your credit card, where you borrow more money to make the credit card payment, and then you have to borrow even more money to pay for the credit card payment loan that you just got to pay off the credit card bill.
So,
I mean, it's a dead end. It's impossible, physically, financially impossible for us to avoid a major economic calamity because of this $35 trillion debt and the way it's ballooning. So you get to the point of asking, well, what's going to be cut? Are you going to get rid of Social Security? You're going to get rid of Medicare? You're going to have no national defense? What are you going to get rid of?
That's what I was fixing to basically ask. So the lawyer, what I'm getting for this is, if they do that, we're not funding, like I said, Social Security, Medicare, military, any type of federal police. We don't have enough money to pay anything. Is that right?
Right off the bat, the moment that our creditors say they're not going to loan us any more money, right off the bat, we're going to have to cut spending by 30 to 40%.
Wow.
And the problem with cutting that spending is that that has an effect on the economy. Like a place like Huntsville that is so heavily reliant on national defense spending, all of a sudden it dries up and blows away. And then you've got a whole bunch of people who used to be paying taxes that aren't paying taxes anymore because their defense companies have gone out of business. So now you've got them on welfare so that your expenditure obligations have gone up. And then you've also got less money with which to make the payments on the things that were already being cut 30 to 40%. So what we're doing is we're playing with a national disaster unlike anything America's ever seen, that probably would be worse than both the death counts and economic destruction of the Civil War.
So, I mean, and just what you say, so we lose the defense up there. So when you lose those jobs, that's going to affect everything else then, because now nobody's shopping at Walmart or going to Chili's or
building houses,
building houses, or buying cars, or going to. So
it has a cascading effect.
Yeah, so that's going to be a total economic collapse, like the Civil War. I mean,
it also has an adverse effect on local and state revenues. They suddenly have to make dramatic cuts to their spending. They have to lay off a bunch of their employees because they don't have the money to pay them. They have to cut their retirement benefits that they owe these government employees. And I'm telling you, you better have your guns, you better have your ammo, and you better have your food and water source.
I mean, I've never thought or realized this the way you just explained it. I mean, you're basically going to have a total breakdown of society.
That is one of the risks. The worst risk is akin to what we saw after the Great Depression in the 1930s. You may recall that we built up our military for World War I. Mm-hmm. And then afterwards, we started laying people off, fewer personnel serving in the military. We started mothballing our ships. We did not engage in research and development for new weaponry, so that by the time 1941 got here, the Japanese looked at how weak our national security was and thought they could actually win a war with us. And so they attacked. Think of how much worse it would have been if the Japanese in 1941 had weapons of mass destruction like Russia, China, soon to be Iran, Pakistan, soon to be North Korea, soon to be terrorist organizations are going to have in the next 5 to 10 years. How are we going to hold up if one of our geopolitical enemies decides to attack us in our weakened state like Japan did in 1941, with the major difference being that the aggressor nation can use weapons of mass destruction? And if not nuclear, it might be communist China's favorite weapon of choice, biological.
So let me ask you one thing, Congressman, then I'll talk to you about that, because I'll have several good interviews here. I'll put it up. So if an economic collapse like that happened, is there any way to recover from it? I mean, because
we recovered from the Civil War, we recovered from the Great Depression, but it's going to be very, very hard times. Now, the benefit of the Great Depression was that it taught people the work ethic. It taught people the value of an education. If they didn't work and they didn't have a good education, they were either going to have a lifestyle in poverty or they were going to starve, okay? Or they weren't going to have health care, or they weren't going to have a roof over their heads, or things were just going to be generally bad for themselves, their families, their kids, their spouses. And people learned from that, and that stealing process created what we are fondly calling America's greatest generation, that won World War II, and that dramatically improved our economic situation, a benefit that we've been receiving for now 75 years. So that's the benefit of what we would go through. Whoever's left would be strong and they wouldn't be wimps like we have now in so many of our schools and in so many different occupations. People who think they're entitled to exist because they exist, not recognizing that, by golly, if you want to exist, you need to work for it. You need to provide yourself with the basics of life. You should not be using the government to, in effect, steal other people's money so that you can live off other people's work ethic. People in the 1930s had no thought of doing that. They didn't like welfare. They wanted to be self-sufficient, independent, and they did whatever it took to put themselves in that position.
Yeah, I've got a good friend I went to high school with right now, and he's a kid, he's about 15 or 16. He's telling me that and stuff, and he's different than what I hear, with so many kids today, because like he makes a lot of money, but he makes his kid go cut grass every summer and earn money so he understands uh, what it takes to do that. And yeah, so that's a loss on somebody that was sorry I got off on that. Now let me get back to these you saw it militarily with China and Russia and Iran and North Korea. I mean, I'm looking at this right here that we could have a war tip off in the Middle East and you just have an invasion in Russia and then China go to Taiwan. What would the U.S. do? I mean, you could have a domino effect.
I don't know the answer to that question because I don't know who's going to be president.
But could we respond on 3 or 4 different fronts like that?
No, not if they're all at once. We don't have the military capability of fighting a 3 or 4 front war.
Because I could say, well, what's going on in the Middle East? I mean, like I said, with Iran and North Korea, and then with China. I mean, I don't know. Do you think we need to increase uh, troop size again?
That's a very good question. It would probably be of benefit. You've got pros and cons related to it. And the question is, how serious are these threats at the moment by foreign powers? And if you reach the decision, hey, we're going to be in a military conflict, then yeah, you need to increase your military capabilities and you need to do it quickly. Having said that, you're looking at asymmetrical warfare. You're looking at types of warfare that have never been seen before, particularly with respect to China. China's got a biological weapons program, in my judgment. COVID-19 is an offshoot of that biological weapons program. In my judgment, COVID-19 is man-made. In my judgment, it originated in the Wuhan bioweapons lab of the People's Liberation Army. In my judgment, it was a part of their weapons program. And the only question is whether it was accidentally released on an unsuspecting public or Communist China released it intentionally to see how quickly it would circumvent the globe and how the free world would react to it. Communist China, on many occasions, has made it clear, their leadership has, that they believe that World War III is going to be biological and not nuclear, that the weapon of mass destruction of choice will be biological. And in that vein, Communist China is trying to develop biological weapons that will only attack people who have certain DNA characteristics. For instance, that you're Caucasian, or that you originate in Africa, or you've got blue eyes, or whatever the DNA particle is that you want to en masse attack. And the problem that America and the rest of the world has with biological warfare is knowing who did it and what are you going to do about it once it's done. Communist China, by way of example, is going full force to try to make America dependent on communist China for our medicines. Now, if there's a biological war and we don't have the research and development capability, or if we do, we don't have the manufacturing capability to very quickly produce the kinds of vaccines that are necessary to protect us from a biological warfare agent, we lose.
Carson, let's talk about COVID one. I remember in 2020, I was watching the news. I think I had on CNN or something, and they had a story. It was like 3 minutes. Never seen it again. Never heard anybody pick up on it. But they said what the guy who was interviewing or whatever. It back in like 2018 or something. That our agents, whatever, had gained access, and they reported that there was that we was to have a major problem. Um, do you think it's possible that China did release that?
Don't know the answer to that.
I mean, I think that, I mean, like I said, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it just seems so odd to me that that's in their, weapons program, and it's released right in the middle of a presidential race. I just,
Well, quite clearly, communist China prefers Kamala Harris as the president of the United States. And so they are doing things right now, particularly over the internet, but in other ways, to try to bolster up Kamala Harris to make her look better in the eyes of American voters. They are very sophisticated in their understanding of the American political process, and they are also very sophisticated in using the internet to promulgate messages that help one political party or another, that help one congressional candidate or senatorial candidate versus another. That's unfortunately one of the side effects of the internet age.
I want to talk to you about some of those conversations you brought morality in America. I never thought that I would see the stuff that I am now with people, a man killing a woman and vice versa. And so I'm sitting there that I'm thinking, we're just going to end, and it scares the hell out of me because I can sit there and see that in time they're going to have pedophiles saying they're born this way and it's natural. And I mean, can you see that this perversion is just going to continue to grow?
Absolutely. Our enemies are doing everything they can to make sure that America's moral values are in decline. Moral values consist of a lot of different things, but basically they're a set of principles that guide us in our everyday lives. And to the extent they guide us in their everyday lives, they also guide our nation. If we don't have principles or moral values, then we're less likely to stand up for things that are right, things that are good for ourselves, our country, and the world. By way of example, go back to some of the military actions that we have engaged in. They were fought because of our moral values. They were fought because we wanted to help people who are being subjugated for one reason or another. We won World War II in large part because we had a common set of moral values. We won the Cold War because we believed in liberty and freedom. That's a set of moral values. We have fought in places like Vietnam because we wanted to stop Marxism and communism. That's a moral value. Same thing for North Korea. We have fought in places like Iraq and Afghanistan and Kuwait because we wanted to help people who had lost their country or who had lost their lives, or to stop attacks in the future against the United States of America. Those are all moral values. If you don't have moral values guiding you, then you don't have your compass helping you do the right thing rather than the wrong thing with the power that you wield.
Congressman, I'm so sorry. I got talking to you too long, and went off track there. I have several nice interviews to put up here now, but let me ask you one question, and I'll let you go. I'm sorry for keeping this long. In your opinion, right now, who do you think is going to win?
I don't have a judgment. It's too close to call.
So, you think it go either way? I mean, coin flip. Okay.
We still have 90 days. Whichever campaign has a breakout wins. Whichever campaign has a collapse loses.
Fair enough. Congressman, thank you so much for talking to me again. And again, I'm sorry for keeping you so long.
No, that's all right. How long were we on?
Let's see here.
Hour and a half.
Yeah, hour and a half. But you're such a knowledgeable man, and when you got off from the subjects, I got lost in the conversation. So
that's all right, Chris. Fun rapping with you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Congressman Brooks, and talk to you
soon. Take care.
All right, thanks, sir.